How I caught Mr. John and Miss Eva on my first day in school. When you meet some people, you begin to think they do not have feelings because of the way they act when they are around the opposite sex. People like that are always found in each organization, society, workplace, or home. I know you have started guessing what I am talking about, but you need to read my entire story to completely know what I am saying. This story is based on what happened in my high school. My name is Sophia. I am a teenager who just entered high school after completing my primary education. When I completed my primary education, I was spoilt of choices on the secondary school to attend because there were many schools close to my locality. After taking my time to inspect all the schools and their facilities, I finally settled for St. Peter's High School. My dad and my mum allowed me to choose the high school I wanted to attend. The same cannot be said of my friends. Most of them had to settle for the schools their parents chose for them. I chose Monday to inspect the schools. I visited all the schools in my locality on Monday, but I had to return to St. Peter's on Friday because it was the school that caught my attention the most during my inspection on Monday. My visit to St. Peter's on Friday cemented my choice. At that point, there was no going back. It was either St. Peter's or nothing. I waited for my father to return from work on Friday so that I can inform him. My father usually returns from work every Friday because his office is far from our house. He leaves home very early on Monday and returns every Friday. When I heard the sound of my father's car on Friday, I ran outside to welcome him like I always do. We both hugged each other and I collected his bag and his shoes. I took his bag and his shoes inside while he was talking to one of our neighbors. I sat on the couch patiently, waiting for when my father will enter the room. As soon as my father entered the room, he went straight to the bathroom to have a bath. After bathing, he came to the kitchen to have his dinner that was already served by my mom. You could see that my father was very hungry from the way he was eating his food. I wanted to engage him in a conversation when he was eating, but I knew I would not get his 100% concentration because of the hunger. I sat patiently on the couch waiting for my father to finish eating his food. After 15 minutes, I noticed that my dad was now satisfied. He was already engaging my mom in a conversation. He and my mom were talking about what happened at his office. He was telling my mom how the week was very stressful. After all, he had to attend to a lot of files because his boss did not show up at the office throughout the week due. My mom also told him that she had a stressful week at the office too. She said her company got submitted and defended a proposal. She said she and one of her colleagues were the ones saddled with the responsibility of defending the proposal. My dad asked her if they have been awarded the project. She said the company is still assessing the performance of all the companies that submitted a proposal. I lied on the couch when I noticed that their conversation was getting longer than expected. All I had in mind was that I will inform him about my choice of school before he goes to bed. After about 2 hours, my dad left the dining and joined me on the couch. I told him how I have been waiting for him for the past 1 hour. He asked me why I was waiting for him and I told him that I have something important to tell him. I noticed that my dad exhibited fear on his face because I am not the type that gets serious when talking to him. I always laugh when I want to talk to him. Therefore, the seriousness that I put on made him exhibit fear. On my own, I deliberately put up a serious face because I didn't want him to reject my choice. I wanted him to see some element of seriousness in me. I told him it was about my school. He asked me if I have finally chosen a high school I will attend when school resumes. I told him that I have found one. He asked me the name of the school and where the school is located. I told him the name of the school is St. Peter's High School. I do not need to tell him the location because he knows the school very well. He usually drives past the school when he is going to work. He asked me why I chose St. Peter's High School instead of other schools in our locality. I told him that I inspected all the schools in our locality one after the other. I said I chose St. Peter's High School because I felt St. Peter's High School is better than the others in terms of infrastructure and many other things. I told him I will be happy if he allows me to go to St. Peter's. My dad was silent for some seconds. I asked him why he was silent. He was just looking at me. After some minutes, my dad finally agreed. He said since St. Peter's High School is my choice, he is good with it. He said he just wants to be sure whether I have chosen the best. I explained to him why I think St. Peter's is the best. I told him how I visited the entire school one after the other before I finally made my decision. My dad said it is good. I got up from where I was sitting and hugged him. My dad said he was going to personally drive me to the school the next Monday to make inquiries about the school. I couldn't contain my joy as I made my way to my room. When I entered my room, I lied down on my bed hoping that the next day will be Monday. I woke up the next morning with a big smile on my face. The smile was so huge that my parents noticed it. My dad asked me why I was so happy. I told him I can't wait to go with him to St. Peter's high school on Monday. I told him how the house has been boring since I started staying at home. A few minutes into the discussion with my dad, my mum called us to the dining. She has prepared tea and bread for us. My dad and I joined my mum in the dining and we continued our discussion. After the meal, we returned to the sitting room to watch a movie. My dad relaxes during the weekends by watching different movies. My dad and I watched movies for more than 5 hours before he stepped out to see his friend. I wanted to follow him because I know how boring the house will be, but my father declined. When my dad left, I returned to my room and continued with the novel I was reading. I read the novel till late in the night. I left my room when my mom called me that dinner has been served. My dad was also back from where he went to. I joined my parents at the dining and we all had dinner together. After the meal, I waved my parents goodnight as they made their way into their room. They waved me goodnight too and they told me not to forget my prayer before I sleep. As soon as I entered my room, I picked up my novel from where I left because I wanted to read it completely before the next day. The next day is Sunday and it's always a busy day for the family because we usually leave home very early for church and we will return very late in the night. I read my novel until around 3 a.m. before I decided to sleep, knowing fully well that the remaining chapters of the novel would not take me more than 20 minutes to complete. At exactly 7 a.m., I heard a knock on my door. I knew it was my parents. They want to wake me up so that I can get ready for church because we usually leave home by 7:30 a.m. I didn't want to leave my bed because I was still feeling sleepy. The sleep I had at the time they came knocking was not more than 4 hours. My parents continued knocking repeatedly when they noticed that I did not leave my bed. When the knocks became unbearable, I had no option but to leave my bed. I stood up from my bed and made my way to the door. When I opened my door, I met my parents standing in front of my door waiting for me to come out. My father asked me why it took so long for me to open the door. I told him I was fast asleep because I slept very late. My father asked me why I slept very late when I knew there was church service the next day. I closed the door and rushed to the bathroom because my parents were already waiting. After taking my bath, I picked up one of my clothes and I rushed outside to meet my parents who were already waiting for me. We prayed in the sitting room and we all made our way to the car. We entered the car and my dad drove off. While driving, my dad told me how important it was for me to sleep early. He said as a teenager, I need 8 hours or more of sleeping time. He said he was not happy with me because I almost made him and my mum late for church. My parents like going to church very early because they are part of the church executives. Church executives are expected to be at the church 30 minutes before the church program starts. I told my father that I was sorry. I told him that I will not repeat such. My father said he has accepted my apology, but he wants to tell me some of the dangers of lack of having proper night rest. I told him that I was listening. My father said there are short-term and long-term dangers of lack of proper sleep. He said the short dangers are a lack of alertness. He said missing 2 hours from the recommended 8 hours can have an impact on the feeling of an individual. He said another short-term danger is excessive sleeping during the daytime. He said if care is not taken, I won't be able to participate in any church activity today. I told him I will make sure I participate in all church programs. I said my lack of sleep will not hinder my performance in church. My father continued with his lecture. He said another short-term danger of lack of proper night rest is that it can lead to road accidents if the individual is the one driving. My father said even if he had taught me how to drive before today, he wouldn't have allowed me to drive the car as soon as he noticed that I did not sleep very well the previous night. My father said all the dangers he listed are short-term dangers. He said others that are more dangerous than the ones he has mentioned. He said we will continue with that when we are heading back home. As soon as we drove into the church, my dad and my mom rushed out of the vehicle to join the church executives meeting which had already started. I went into the church to wait for when church service will commence because church service usually commences after the executive meeting. After about 15 minutes, the executives meeting ended and all the executives made their way into an already filled church. The service started with an opening prayer by the presiding bishop. After that, other church activities followed. I noticed that my father was looking at me when the church service was going on. He wanted to be sure that I was not sleeping. Although I was feeling sleepy, I composed myself because I didn't want my dad to catch me sleeping. I know if he does, I will be the topic of discussion in the house. I was the topic of discussion in the car, but I didn't want my case to extend to the house. I did all my best to participate actively in all the church activities. After about 6 hours, the church program ended, and it was time to go home. When my dad told me that it was time to go home, 2 things came to my mind. The first was that I was happy because I will have the opportunity to sleep when I get home. The second thought was how will I be able to endure the series of the lecture that will come up in the car. My father didn't complete his lecture when we were driving to church in the morning and he promised to continue on our way home. I know my dad never forgets, so I couldn't pray for him to forget. I entered the car thinking how I was going to endure another series of lectures. As soon as I entered, We drove off. My father was silent for a few minutes. At first, I thought he has forgotten what he promised to talk about. No sooner than my mom told my dad that she was tired than he began his lecture again. He called me by my name, Mariah. He said we were talking about something when we were driving to church in the morning. I told him that we were talking about the dangers associated with a lack of having proper night rest. I reminded him that he has told me about the short-term dangers. I said it's the long-term dangers that he promised to talk about when we are heading back home. My dad was impressed, thinking I enjoyed the morning lecture. He didn't know how boring it sounded to me. He didn't know that I had to listen because there was nothing I could do. He didn't know that if I had an option, I wouldn't step out of the house in the morning, not to talk of listening to a very long lecture. The reminder gave him the impression that I enjoyed the lecture, and you could see from his face that he was willing to continue. He started the second phase of the lecture by asking me if I understood everything he said in the morning while we were driving to church. I told him that I understood everything perfectly. Then, he began with the long-term dangers. He said one of the long-term dangers of lacking proper night rest is high blood pressure. He said others are diabetes, heart attack, heart failure or stroke, obesity, depression, impairment in immunity, low sex drive, premature wrinkling and dark circles under the eyes, increase in the stress hormone, and cortisol in the body. He said there are many other dangers, but these are the ones he can tell me for now. He said all these diseases are very difficult to cure. He said if a patient contract all the diseases he mentioned, it is very difficult to treat them completely. He said in most cases, the patient will have to be living with the disease until he or she dies. He asked me if I will want to contact any of these diseases at a young age. I told him that I do not want to. He said if I do not want to contract any of those diseases, I have to be sleeping at least 8 hours every day. He said if I am watching a movie or reading a book, I should drop whatever I am doing when it is time for bed. He said the movie I am watching or the book I am reading won't go anywhere. He said I can continue with my movie or my book when I wake up the next day. At first, I wasn't interested in the lecture, but when I started realizing that what my dad was telling is right, I started paying attention. I appreciated him and I told him I will heed all his advice. My dad said he will end his lecture with some tips on how to sleep better. He said if I want to sleep better, I should follow some of this advice. He said I should treat getting enough sleep as if it is important. He said, for now, I have the opportunity of choosing when to sleep because I do not have a job that can stop me. He said I should schedule an adequate time for sleep. He said another tip is to keep a consistent wake time. He said I should wake up at the same time every day. He said waking up at the same time every day will help you sleep better at night. He said a fixed wake time helps to build a strong desire throughout wakefulness. He said keeping a consistent wake time gradually builds, and shortening it by sleeping will make it harder to fall asleep the next night. He said another very important tip is to put my phones and my novels away as soon as it's time for sleep. He said books and phones keep the mind humming and far from the relaxed state that the body needs before bedtime. He said I should keep my books and my phone far away an hour before my bedtime. I appreciated my dad for the lecture as we made our way into our compound. We all came down from the car and we entered the house. We were all hungry, so my mom rushed into the kitchen while my dad and I sat on the couch. My dad put on the television set because he wanted to watch a football match between Manchester United and Arsenal. My father doesn't miss Arsenal matches because he is a very big fan. He is always in a joyous mood anytime Arsenal wins a match. One of the best times to collect money from my dad is when Arsenal wins a match. There was still 30 minutes before the start of the match, so my dad left the television set and picked up the iron and went to the laundry room to prepare the clothes he will use at work for the week. My dad likes to do his things by himself, so my mom does not bother herself with his office wear. 5 minutes to the commencement of the match, my father left the cloth he was ironing and rushed down to the sitting room. My mom called me to join her in the dining, but he declined. He told my mom to bring his food for him in the sitting room. My dad does not like any disturbance when it's time to watch Arsenal Football Club. My mom had no option but to bring his food to the sitting room. As soon as she served him his food, she went back to her room because she doesn't like football. A few minutes into the match, you could see how uncomfortable my dad was because Manchester United was playing better than Arsenal. He kept shouting at the players even though they could not hear him. 20 minutes into the match, Manchester United scored through Fred. The goal changed my dad's mood. I looked at him and I saw how sad he was. The food my mom served him was still in his front. He hadn't eaten more than 3 or 4 spoons. 45 minutes after, the referee blew the whistle for halftime. I told my dad to eat his food before the commencement of the second half because I know if Arsenal loses after 90 minutes, my dad might not eat his food. He picked up his food and started eating. I went to the fridge to help him get a chilled drink. He ate the food and he took the drink. He slept on the couch waiting for the second half to commence. As soon as the players started making their way into the pitch, My dad stooped up from his sleeping position and sat down. The referee blew the whistle for the commencement of the second half. No sooner than the second half began than my father began to shout at the players. I kept telling him that the people he was shouting at cannot hear what he was saying. 65 minutes into the match, Arsenal equalized through Ben White. My dad jumped for joy as Ben White headed the ball into the net. The match continued and there was no goal until 80 minutes. 88 minutes into the match, Arsenal took the lead through Gabriel. My dad couldn't contain his joy. He was laughing uncontrollably. He told me to get him a bottle of wine from the fridge for celebration. After the 3 minutes of added time, the referee blew his whistle for full time. My dad jumped up that I had to warn him to check the ceiling fan. He opened the wine I brought for him and started drinking. He celebrated the victory until about 9 p.m. when he wanted to go to bed. As soon as I noticed that he was going to bed, I called him and reminded him that the next day is Monday. I told him that he promised to take me to St. Peter's High School to inquire about the school. My dad said he did not forget. He said there was nothing that would make him forget something like that. We waved at each other, and he entered his room while I entered mine. I was already feeling sleepy before I entered, so I lied down on my bed and covered myself with my duvet. In no time, I slept off. At exactly 5:30 a.m., my mom came to my door and knocked. As soon as I heard a knock on my door, I stood up and went to my door. When I opened my door, I saw my mom standing in front of my door. I greeted her and she responded. She said she came to wake me up so that I can prepare myself before my father wakes up. I told her that I was already awake before she came. She left my door and I closed the door. As soon as I closed the door, I took up my shirt and went into my bathroom to take my bath. When I finished taking my bath, I put on the cloth that I had already prepared to wear for the day. After that, I sprayed perfume on my body, and I sat on my bed waiting for my father to come calling. At exactly 6:50 a.m., I heard a knock on my door. I hurriedly stood to open the door. When I opened the door, I saw my father standing at the door already dressed. He told me it was time to leave. He left my door and went straight to his car. He said I should join him. I locked my door and I went to my mom's room to tell her that I was leaving. She followed me to the car and told me to take care of myself. I entered the car and we drove off. At exactly 7:15, we arrived at St. Peter's High School. My father parked his car and we both alighted from his car. When we came down, my dad asked for the head teacher's office. We were directed to the head teacher's office, but she was not on seat. We looked for a seat close to her office and sat down in anticipation of the head teacher's arrival. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the head teacher arrived. When she arrived, she was informed that she had people waiting for her, so she made her way to where we were seated. She greeted us and apologized for coming late. She opened her office and she told us to come inside. When we entered her office, she told us to sit. She gave us water to drink. After we drank the water, she asked us how she could help us. My dad told her that he wants me to join their school when the new session resumes. He told her that his visit to the school is to make an inquiry about the payment, and to personally inspect the school himself to see if the facilities they have are up to the required standard. The head teacher said she is happy to have us. She said new students are to pay $1,000 for enrollment. She said the $1,000 will cover the school fee, registration fee, and every other thing I will need for the term. My dad said it was okay. The head teacher told us to follow her so that my dad can inspect the facilities in the school. She took us to the school pitch, the health center, the school hostels, the school library, and all the classes in the school. She introduced all the staff in the school to us. I was very happy as the head teacher was showing my dad the school infrastructure. At the end of the tour, you could see from my dad's face that he was very impressed with what he saw. We returned to the head teacher's office after the tour. My dad made the payment and he left. He drove to his office while I looked for a taxi to take me home. When I got home, my mom had already prepared lunch. I rushed down to the kitchen because I was very hungry. After eating, I explained what went down to my mom. I told her how I was already anticipating resumption. The day of resumption came and I was very happy. I woke up very early because I wanted to join my dad in his car. I took my bath and I wore my cloth. I sat on the bed waiting for my dad to call me. After some minutes, I heard a knock on my door. I stood up and rushed to the door because I knew it was my dad. When I opened the door, I met my dad standing in front of my door. He told me it was time to leave for school. I went to the kitchen to pick the food that my mom prepared for me. I put the food in my bag and I joined my dad in his car. As soon as I entered the car, my dad drove off. We arrived at St. Peter's High School at exactly 8 a.m. I alighted from my dad's car and we waved each other goodbye. When I entered, students were already in their class. I approached the security man for direction. He held my hand and took me to my class. A teacher was already in the class. As soon as I entered, He told me to introduce myself in front of the class. I told the class that my name is Mariah. I told them that I am 13 years. I told them about my family and what prompted me to St. Peter's High School. After introducing myself, the teacher told me his name. He said his name is Mr. John. He told me that he is my class teacher. He said I should come to him if I need any help in my academics. After introducing himself to me, he told me to take my seat. There was no available seat at the front, so I had to make my way to the back seat. Mr. John is our mathematics teacher. He told us that his first lesson is just an introduction to the subject, so he won't stay long in our class. After talking to us for 20 minutes, he left our class and went to his office. I trailed him because I wanted to talk to him. I met him in front of his office talking to a female teacher. I got to know that the name of the teacher is Miss Eva because of her tag. I told Mr. John that I wanted to see him, but he said I should come back in 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I went back to Mr. John's office. When I got to his office door, I noticed that it was locked. I was about to return to my class when I started hearing a noise in Mr. John's office. I went back to the back of his office where the window is located. I looked through the window and I saw Mr. John and Miss Eva kissing passionately. They were so engulfed in the kissing that they didn't know that someone was looking at them. After kissing for some minutes, Mr. John and Miss Eva both undressed and started romancing passionately. At that point, the noise that was coming out of Mr. John's office became very loud. They kissed and romanced until noon. I noticed that they started undressing when they heard the bell for break time. At that point, they knew all the students will rush out of their classes. They knew they will be caught if they do not stop immediately. Hey, guys, please let me know if this is right or if this is what I should do, or please let me have your thoughts on this. Let me have your thoughts on this. Let me have your thoughts on this.